Morning everybody, my name is Chris McCoy. I'm the Senior Counsellor for Climate, Energy and Resources from the Australian Government. I'm based here in Paris and I am very pleased to welcome both the group of people that have joined us in the room and of course the many more of you who are watching online in the various live stream forums to the Energy Efficiency Hub's special event at this very special 8th Global Energy Efficiency Conference that's being co-hosted here in Versailles by the International Energy Agency and of course the French government in the Ministry of Ecological Transition. So welcome everyone today. We have quite a packed agenda. We've got some very interesting and key speakers here with us and I'll introduce them as the time goes through. But I just wanted a quick moment to talk about the Energy Efficiency Hub itself and the purpose for why we've gathered here today for this event. So the Energy Efficiency Hub currently comprises 16 members from countries all across the world, some within the IEA family and some outside of that area. And it's a really unique setting where governments are able to come together and share the practical lessons that they are learning and the challenges that they are experiencing in energy efficiency activities. And it's by sharing these lessons and by sharing these challenges in the way that they've been overcome that other countries are actually able to pick up those things that would work best in their own circumstances and apply them straight away. And as I'm sure most of you would agree, particularly given that you are here at an energy efficiency conference, energy efficiency is the first and foremost thing that will allow countries and the global community to address not only energy affordability and security, but very much so also the transition to a net zero economy. So this is a reasonably long event that we have today, thankfully, because we've got some, as I said, very interesting speakers. It's about an hour and a half. It is being live streamed and it is being recorded, so audiences from across all of the Hub members will be allowed to join and have a look. Of course, it's getting quite late in Australia, so most of those people will be looking at this online at another time. In terms of what we're going to listen to today, I'm very pleased to actually be able to have the head of our delegation here, Ms. Claire McLaughlin. She's going to provide us with a keynote speech which will talk about what Australia is currently doing in terms of energy efficiency and positioning that more broadly in the global space. We will then have a session where each of my panel members, we have Tudor Constantinescu from the European Commission, we have Ben Cobb from NRCan in Canada, Paul Bonnet from the Ministry of Energy Transition in France, and last but most certainly not least, Dr. Brian Motherway from the International Energy Agency, who will each share some of the lessons that they have been learning, very much around the theme of accelerating energy efficiency as a way of dealing with the energy crisis. And then we will be able to have a bit of a discussion where the panellists will be able to actually ask some questions and talk about their recent experiences, and then we'll have the closing session. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to our head of delegation from Australia. She is also the head of the Energy Division within the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, Ms. Claire McLaughlin.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you people who have joined us here in the room during the lunch break. We're very grateful for that. And to the people joining us online, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to participate in this event. I'm very new to the energy space, but my people back in Canberra have been telling me about the Energy Efficiency Hub since I started. It's a hugely important activity for us, and I'll say a little bit more about why in a minute. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from our other speakers today, and great to meet you all and good to be here together. I wanted to thank the IEA and the French Ministry for hosting the conference as well. I've been at IEA events before in a previous life. They're always very impressive and well run, and at the moment my main objective being here is not to send any photos of the chateau back to people in Australia. I'm in a conference centre, it's somewhere near Paris, and so that's important. But on to the content of this discussion. The unprecedented global energy crisis resulting from Russia's invasion of Ukraine has dramatically escalated concerns over energy security and affordability, and governments around the world have acted quickly and decisively to ensure their energy security. This has, of course, included several large-scale initiatives, notably the US Inflation Reduction Act and the EU's Net Zero Industry Act, aimed at accelerating the transition to clean energy and net zero. It's no surprise that energy efficiency has been a key part of these responses. Greater energy efficiency not only moderates the impact of current and future energy prices, it reduces the investment required for further energy transition. This makes energy efficiency measures highly scalable. Every single adoption, even at the individual level, advances progress toward climate targets. It's been really heartening to see energy efficiency emerge as a major theme in global collaboration, which is what makes the Energy Efficiency Hub so important. It's an unmatched opportunity to have frank and open discussions about energy efficiency and related policies. Government-to-government exchange is one of the best ways to develop effective policy, regulation and implementation strategies, and we have some of the most important people in that space here today and working through the hub. The energy transformation and climate action have been the top priorities for Australia over the last year, and energy efficiency is becoming an increasingly important part of that. So Australia has worked with the IEA, our global partners, state and territory governments and industry to scale up action on energy efficiency. The recent in-depth review of Australia's energy policy, in which the IEA noted that the Australian government had stepped up its climate ambition and highlighted our increasingly ambitious climate targets. The IEA's net zero emissions by 2050 scenario requires a 4% energy efficiency improvement per year. And the IEA noted that Australia's energy efficiency improvements needed to double from 2020 levels to achieve this. The ambitious step change model from the Australian energy market operator requires significant structural changes to energy consumption, and Australia is committed to making these changes. One of the ways we will do that is by learning from other people's experience through the Energy Efficiency Hub. So we've seen exciting success in scaling up new technologies, including in renewable energy. Australian solar penetration, already the highest in the world, has increased further since the beginning of the energy crisis. Almost 1 in 3 Australian households now has solar PV on its roof. But we've also faced many other challenges that I imagine people here will be familiar with. The first is that while rapid increases in energy prices have made the benefits of improving energy efficiency clear, many households and businesses have reacted to the crisis by just limiting their spending and avoiding upfront costs. And there are many who simply can't afford to make energy efficiency upgrades. We've seen the powerful role governments can play in addressing market and supply disruptions. The Australian government deployed its energy price relief plan in December last year, delivering $1.5 billion directly to relieve energy bills. And we're following that up with the energy savings package announced in the May budget, which includes $1 billion for household energy efficiency upgrades, $310 million in tax measures to help businesses improve their energy efficiency, and significant investment into expanding and modernising our energy standards. Importantly, we're also allocating $300 million to support energy efficiency upgrades for social and community housing, so that those who would most benefit from these upgrades are not excluded. And together these initiatives create a strong incentive to upgrade energy efficiency of homes, buildings and businesses. What we are learning through this process is that there is a clear space for government intervention in the current environment. governments can reduce the financial pressure from energy bills and the upfront costs of energy efficiency upgrades, creating an opportunity for significant energy efficiency gains. The second challenge, I guess, for us is that accelerating this change is hard and expensive. Net zero targets demand rapid action on energy efficiency, but new policy takes time to design. While we're working on a new national energy performance strategy to be announced in October this year, Australia's established investment facilities, our green banks, the Clean Energy Finance Corporation and the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, will soon both be able to directly fund energy efficiency measures, which hasn't previously been the case, enabling them to support the acceleration of demand-side technologies. Demand-side technologies don't only improve energy efficiency, they make it much easier for industries to adopt further energy improvements by reducing the network investment required. These changes to existing arrangements have allowed us to rapidly improve energy efficiency while we're working on the strategy and take advantage of the conditions created by the energy price crisis to help people actually make changes that are going to save them money and energy really, really quickly. So energy efficiency is the best tool at our disposal for addressing the crisis in lots of ways, which is why the opportunity for government-to-government exchange through this hub is really important. Energy efficiency policy, regulation and implementation are not without their challenges, and I'm sure our other speakers today will tell us lots about the challenges that they're facing in this space as well. The discussions we have today will be really helpful and important for learning from each other's experiences about how to mitigate risks associated with the crisis response and how to accelerate energy efficiency action. I'm really, really keen to hear about the experiences from my EU, French and Canadian colleagues. And with that, I'll hand back to Chris. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. If anyone does have any questions around any of the items that Claire's discussed, please hold on. We will have an opportunity perhaps towards the end, and of course Claire will be here for the rest of the conference. So we do encourage, if anyone would like to hear more about Australia, please do come and have a chat. Before we get on to the individual lessons and examples that will be shared from our colleagues here, we are really fortunate today to have Brian Motherway with us. And of course the International Energy Agency has been very clearly demonstrating its leadership in terms of drawing together its members, the broader family and the global community throughout the last, well, it's been more than a year and a bit, but the general crises that we've faced, both with the COVID pandemic and more recently with the invasion in the Ukraine. And so in this, the energy efficiency team has been doing a lot of work with a lot of countries, both across the European Union but across the world, about how to help countries and individuals control their energy use and its affordability, and then build from that to a better base of security. So I'd like to invite Brian to share some of his perspectives to set the scene for us as to why energy efficiency really is at the heart of an energy security and energy affordability.
Thank you, Chris, Claire, and good afternoon, everybody, and my fellow panellists. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you to our friends in the Hub for hosting this event. First of all, thank you, Chris and Claire, for Australia's leadership in energy efficiency generally, but of course in the Hub as well. We have the privileged position to host the Secretariat of the Energy Efficiency Hub in the IEA, and we work very closely with the team and with all of the members of the Hub, and it's a privilege and pleasure to extend that conversation about energy efficiency. And that's why I'm very pleased that the Hub is hosting this event a part of our 8th annual Global Conference on Energy Efficiency, which is our largest one ever. We have 100 countries coming to Versailles for the next 3 days to talk about energy efficiency. Over 30 of them are sending government ministers, over 50 CEOs from private sector organizations around the world, all gathering here because Versailles is nice when the sun is out, but probably more importantly, because they care about energy efficiency. And as Claire was saying, the last year has put a real focus on how we use energy and questions around affordability, resilience, its environmental impact, the social impact of disruption of the kind we've seen in the last year or so around the world. And of course, from dark origins, that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. It's good to see more of a focus on energy efficiency. And of course, the question then in this session is exactly the right question. It's really the theme of our whole conference here. What have we learned from what has happened in the last year, from what governments have done, from what businesses have done, from what individuals have done? And implicitly, but probably more importantly, what then do we do next? This conference is all about action. We want to send people home even more enthused about energy efficiency than they already are, but also empowered to act, learning from each other, learning from best practice and policies around the world. There are good examples of policies everywhere, but nobody is doing enough. We think that governments could and should double annual progress in energy efficiency by the end of this decade. That is necessary if I'm looking at you governments, if you've made commitments to deliver net zero targets, you need to start by doubling your progress on energy efficiency, and you need to do it now. And it can be done. And if you do it, your citizens have lower bills, you reduce your carbon emissions, and you create millions of jobs in the process. It's not easy sometimes because it's not just a question of a stroke of a pen policy and everything will happen. You need to train people, you need to build up supply chains, you need to look at investment flows, you need to look at regulation of how you build houses, how you build infrastructure, but it can be done because every country coming here this week has done something really interesting and people can learn from that, and that's what this really is about. What have we learned from the crisis? Energy efficiency matters. It's a bit annoying to say it, but you know, if we'd all been much more energy efficient a year ago, the crisis wouldn't have hurt as much. That's just a simple fact. And we see not just among countries, but even, you know, in a town like this, there are two homes beside each other. One pays twice as much to stay warm in the winter as next door because it's much less efficient. That may not be the fault of the occupants, but they may not even be within their power to change. But it really makes a difference when prices go up and they really feel it. And that's happening all around the world. So we really need to understand the importance of energy efficiency in people's daily lives. All of us as energy efficiency folks got a lot of calls last year saying, can we do more in efficiency? And that was very gratifying. But then the second sentence was, that will make huge difference in the next 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks. And that was a bit less gratifying because energy efficiency takes time. And we kind of say, I wish you'd asked me that 4 years ago, not just with 4-week time horizons. But I hope we've locked in a greater level of interest in energy efficiency. I hope we've locked in a greater awareness of its importance. Already several times today I've been asked, now the prices have gone down, do you think governments and citizens will lose interest in all this energy efficiency stuff? And I say, I don't think so. I think clearly maybe the rate of headline generation drops a little bit when prices aren't quite as high, but prices are still pretty high, and people have learned lessons about resilience in energy. And I think anyone who's complacent about next winter here in Europe and the coming summer in other parts of the world needs to realize that we took some strong actions in the last year, but we also got lucky with the weather, and also people suffered. People went cold in their homes. Industries had to lay people off because they couldn't afford their energy bills. Let's not pat ourselves on the back too much, but let's pat ourselves on the back a little bit because governments around the world did take action. According to our analysis, governments representing 70% of the global economy installed new energy efficiency policies since the crisis began. And indeed, over 25 countries around the world launched new behaviour and awareness campaigns in the last year. So we do see governments taking action. And so I see them not as the solution, but the foundations for the solution. If we can build on what has happened in the last year, if we can build on what has been done in the last year, then I do think we can look back and see this time as a turning point for energy efficiency. And I hope we see this year's conference as a turning point in energy efficiency, where we really took the foundations that have been built in the last year, but really I'm going to mix my metaphors now, drove it home in terms of learning from the crisis, learning from what's working, everybody learning from each other, and taking it really to the next step. Because doubling is possible by 2030, but it's not easy. It takes a lot of concerted effort by governments, industry, and citizens as a whole. So I hope that this conversation will be part of really pushing us towards that. I'm sorry, I can't stay with you for the whole session, but luckily the guys are recording it, so it'll be a little light viewing for me later in the week. And I do want to thank Chris and Claire and all the panelists and all of you for joining this session. I think it's a really important one, and I'm glad the Hub are part of this year's conference. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. Obviously, there's some very key parts of lessons for us to take away from that. I think overwhelmingly what we should take away is that we have foundations for solutions, which means that we have a lot of the tools in the bank already. It's now about how we deploy them. And our next part of our session is actually an opportunity to hear from each of our panellists how they have been using their tools, how they have been addressing certain challenges, the areas in which they have found success, and hopefully, if they're willing to share some of those areas in which that success has been a little bit more hard to come by, because by understanding where the easy wins and the more challenging spaces are, I think other governments will be better placed to learn and take on and deploy more energy efficiency measures as we move forwards into this transition. So the way the next session will run is that we will hear from the European Commission in France and Canada, and each speaker has been asked to take a period of time, we've said about 5 minutes, to share an experience with just one of the most important measures that they have seen in their countries to accelerate the deployment of energy efficiency. And in terms of some guiding questions, just as a bit of background for the audience, we've asked our panellists to think about what are the key policies that have been implemented as a result of the energy crisis? And what role does energy efficiency play in strengthening energy security and reliability? And how is that looking now that the crisis is a year on and things are changing? So I'd like to turn to our first speaker, which is Mr. Tudor Constantinescu from the European Commission. He is the Principal Advisor to the Director General of Energy and has had many years of experience in this area, and I very much look forward to hearing him share what he has learned over the last little while.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Claire, as well, for being here today and for inviting us, and very pleased to say hello to all the Hub members and the IA colleagues, and to be and to try to share some of the experiences we have passed through over the last year and so on energy efficiency. Now, but let me just step back for a second and say that because it is about answering to a crisis, first of all, we had to answer to the climate crisis. And that's why we had first the Green Deal and the plan launched by our President von der Leyen to have Europe, first of all, as the first carbon neutral continent. And then the whole push which came with the Green Deal for the targets for 2030 and the so-called Fit for 55, already to reduce greenhouse gas emissions more ambitiously, more aggressively by 2030. And this was a big step. Also for energy efficiency, because this means to start modernizing the economy, the whole energy infrastructure which was aging. And this gives a strong step also in security of supply. And for energy efficiency, I have to say, by implementing just the Fit for 55, we could reach a reduction of gas consumption by about 100 billion cubic meters at EU level. And about 1/3 of that would come from energy efficiency measures, and in particular from the recast of the Energy Efficiency Directive and the Energy Performance of Building Directive. But then came the pandemics, and after the pandemics, for the reasons we know, prices went high, and then we had to react to this as well, and we had the recovery and resilience plans, and this was the next answer. And this was, again, putting a lot of focus on energy efficiency. I will come in a second back to that. And this was not enough. Last year, the invasion of Russia on Ukraine and the war on Ukraine, and therefore, really, the energy crisis started to be felt dramatically, and we had to take action. And the first action was this energy-saving action plan. So how to reduce energy consumption shortly, in a short term? First of all, for gas, and we had a plan to reduce gas demand by 15%, and we succeeded almost 18%, between August and March this year, compared to the average period over the last 5 years, the same period. So this was one. The next is part of this energy saving plan where we identified, and also thanks to the IA, Brian left now, but a number of measures which we put forward, looking, of course, first of all, how to reduce the gas demand and identify how through behavior change on how to better control automation, and so we could reduce the gas demand by 5%, but also in transport, by using the trains, by using public transport, by having all these measures, reducing speed on motorways, could reduce oil consumption by other 5%. So this is another example in just this area. But not forgetting, and this is maybe the most important, how to combine short-term and long-term measures, yeah? And this is what the plan pointed as well. So we reduce the consumption for gas, for example, for heating, it's 42% in Europe, but at the same time starting to deploy heat pumps, and now this year will come with a concrete action plan for heat pumps, but already you have the ambition to increase from about 1.5 to 2.6 just in 3 years, million heat pumps per year, and to reach 30 million by 2030 deployment. All these things, of course, and this is maybe the last point to say here, requires also funding. And first of all, it was a recovery and resilience. And I want to point here that a very significant part of that, about 55 billion euros, were allocated for buildings, both public and private buildings. But now with the repower, okay, repower is not bringing so much money. It was just a reaction to the war in Ukraine. But still, a significant part of the funds which are under repower, 20 billion of grants, are going again into energy efficiency measures, including in buildings. And what is important is there are also loan components which are to be combined into this. Also, the European level, the structural funds are playing a very important role. And here again, at least 12 billion euros for the time being have been allocated for renovation of buildings. So there is funding, but of course still, public funding is not enough. We expect this leveraging, and this coalition of energy efficiency funding, building on the energy efficiency financing coalition, I think it's very important and should, in a way, also build new instruments and facilitate picking up of the various funds in the most efficient way and with appropriate leveraging. So this would be the things which, just in these short minutes, but happy to say more afterwards.
Thank you very much, Judah. There's obviously quite a lot that the European Union has been doing, and we've been seeing, Brian said not to congratulate too much, but we would have to say that the European Union was quite strong in its leadership around energy efficiency as a way of addressing the issues that have occurred in the last few months, particularly over the heating season. So obviously the hard work has been paying off. I'd like to turn now to our French representative, Paul Bonnet-Blanc, who is here as the project manager for energy efficiency from the Ministry of Energy Transition. And Paul is going to share with us some pieces of information around France's positions on energy sufficiency.
Thank you. Thanks. I also thank the Energy Efficiency Hub to be here, to be a part of this panel, and to talk a little bit about the experience we have the last 12 months, in a sense that we ran a little bit in a stress test, caused of course by the invasion of Ukraine. And the tense situation on the energy security and energy prices we experience in Europe and we share, like Tudor said. So the primary target of the French plan established in October was basically to reduce consumption. And of course, when we're talking about this, we have in mind, of course, energy efficiency, but for such short range of effect, the plan was to reduce by 10% the energy consumption in 2 years. Of course, we know that the trend of energy efficiency was not, let's say, sufficient for that. And the political momentum was to activate the sufficiency. And that was more in I would say a rather long-term prospect for decarbonization and for carbon neutrality. That concept was also more in the hand of the academic. But even though when we started to work on it, there were many pieces of legislation in the French law dated back from the oil shock. So basically everything was in place. It was not branded sufficiency. Its sufficiency is in the mining, the energy code, as long as efficiency. And it was, let's say, in a sense, again, everything was in place. So, and basically what I want to highlight and take as an example for today's discussion is the 19 degrees. Basically, 19 degrees in buildings were there from the 70s, late 70s, because of the oil shock. And of course, we all experience that 90 degrees was not the target temperature for daylight for occupation in buildings. And I think we share this temperature with our European colleagues at least. But the trick was to say that it was to be mainstream, at least for this winter, and probably for the longer term, because it was in law, it was what we were supposed to do. So it worked. I will jump directly for the result. It worked very well. We are still trying to analyze things, but we reduce consumption in electricity and gas demand by 10%, corrected by climate, because I just want to say that reducing consumption was, we had a target, and modulo the effect of climate, and we had, it was highlighted rather my climate in Europe, but our team was focusing on, of course, corrected data. So minus 10% was a target even at a constant climate. So it was very important, and at the same time, we activate in this sufficiency plan also measure for energy emergency, because when you think about it, okay, legislation was in place. It was more a question of communication and dissemination, that 90 degrees should be mainstream, and at the same time at home and in the building working, because you don't want to see people having a different temperature, home and building. That doesn't make sense. It was also showing results. And we had a little bit of help of this tense situation during winter and cold days, because we had this monitoring things in France, both electricity and gas, daily monitorings. So that helps to convey the feeling that it was making effects, even though we do not have all the figures at the end. But again, like I said, we match we succeed even in 1 year and not 2 years. The thing is that there was discussion, and now we want to go further and have a sufficiency and energy efficiency working together. And it's also the difficulty, I would say, or maybe also the benefit of energy efficiency sufficiency, is that we all thinking about energy consumption. And first, we saw that across sector, because we had a various sector approach, tackling the residential and building and transportation. We have to be consistent, but they were not always at the same level, and we had to start to work on a common language, and 90 degrees again is something very easy to understand and to communicate. And to finish with, of course, as the behavior is important to monitor your energy consumption, to taking care about your energy consumption, we have to, I didn't talk too much about fuel and petrol for transportation. And we want to take the chance, even though it was not part of the energy crisis things, specifically in Europe. We want to activate energy efficiency, efficiency in transportation, using the same plan. It's a little more difficult, of course, because again there was not this urgency things, but that's the work is in progress, I would say, and it's really important to embark all this mobility into what we have seen in buildings and other part of energy efficiency, where energy efficiency is very active.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. I can certainly say, living here in France, I experienced the 19 degrees, as did my children who go to a French school, and so we did get a lot of communication, and then that was obviously quite a successful campaign. It was something that was very widely spoken about and also accepted as a need for change. I'd like to turn now to Ben Kopp, who is Acting Director General of the Office of Energy Efficiency at National Resources of Canada. And I believe that you are going to share some information around buildings and greener homes as the initiative in Canada.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thanks as well to the Energy Efficiency Hub for putting on this event and the invitation to speak here today. And so both to Chris and Claire, thank you very much. Looking forward to sharing a little bit about our Canadian context. Building on, maybe just even to set a bit of a context as well, building on fairly ambitious climate plans over the last number of years, our government came out a few years ago with its emissions reduction plan, which really kind of upped the ante in terms of our climate ambition. And very central to our emissions reduction plan was a focus on energy efficiency. It was, certainly in Canada, the emissions profile in the built sector, the building environment across Canada is very significant. It's about 18% of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada come from the built environment, so obviously a very significant contributor and a very significant area to address if we're going to meet our very ambitious climate goals in Canada. So along the lines of energy efficiency, the rising costs of energy in Canada, being a big driver in terms of the focus on energy efficiency and also the ability of Canadians to pay for their energy as well too, sort of being an increasing factor for the government in terms of how it addresses energy efficiency. We have seen, certainly within our office in Canada, the Office of Energy Efficiency, very significant new program dollars come in, and to program dollars that we had not seen over really for the history in terms of how we support energy efficiency. The program dollars looking at certain areas around building codes and how we get our building codes in Canada up to the highest standard possible for energy efficiency in Canada. Those that implement building codes, it's different jurisdictions across Canada. We have 10 provinces, cities that also implement our building codes. So at the federal government, we are putting forward initiatives to help our jurisdictions get the building codes to the highest level. We have initiatives to support mass retrofits of buildings across Canada as well too. And in our 2022 budget, we put about $600 million into various programs to support energy efficiency in those kinds of areas. Our big flagship initiative that I'm going to talk about today, in terms of really trying to drive energy efficiency across Canada in households, is our Greener Homes initiative. That's a $2 billion initiative to help Canadian homeowners transition to more energy efficient methods in their homes. The way the program works is it provides up to $5,000 to each Canadian household for energy efficient upgrades to their homes. That can be from things like windows and insulations to big ticket items such as heat pumps. And before Canadians can access that money, so they come in to seek acceptance into the program. An energy auditor comes into people's homes, provides a list of the upgrades that would make sense for individual homeowners, and then they can access those dollars for upgrades at a grant, so a $5,000 grant for the costs of the retrofits. Combined with that program is $40,000 in interest-free loans as well over a 10-year period. So combined with the $5,000 grant is up to $40,000 in interest-free loans to help Canadians also to do upgrades to their homes. So that program, admittedly is a program, given the way the program is designed, it does, tend to address, to be a focus for people in sort of the higher income brackets in Canada, which is great in terms of building momentum across Canada, but didn't really address sort of the needs of lower income Canadians to transition off of fossil fuels and into other forms of heating and cooling in their homes. So last year we another $250 million to help Canadians transition off of oil and into heat pumps in their homes. So that combined with the $5,000 in the Greener Homes program, with another $5,000 towards the cost of heat pumps. And that program has provided Canadians with dollars up front as well. So rather than paying people after the retrofits are done in their homes, that provides $10,000 to Canadians up front in order to meet those costs of putting a heat pump into their home, and really to transition off a very costly oil heating in their homes to a lower cost form of heating and cooling as well too. The program has been quite successful. We've through the broader Greener Homes program, we are putting out about $1.5 million a day to Canadians to do those upgrades in their homes. The program has been quite successful in that sense. And I think overall what we have been aiming to do with the program is also partner with each of our provincial jurisdictions who have similar programs. So we've been trying to put our dollars federally into households, as well as combine that with individual programs that are already available to people in individual Canadian provinces to really get to the highest dollar value possible for people looking to do upgrades in their homes. So overall, these programs have been very successful, and certainly, where I think our focus is moving is now, as we start to build, more momentum towards energy efficiency upgrades in homes, more awareness of the benefits that people can derive from putting electric heat pumps in their homes, is to transition to, making sure that people understand that, these are more affordable ways to heat and cool their homes, and to help Canadians who do pay a significant amount for their energy bills to be able to transition to electric heat pumps. So yeah, the programs have been quite successful from that standpoint. We are continuing to do about $1.5 million a day to ensure that we continue to further this transition across Canada.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ben. Obviously, there are some similar but also some unique challenges and areas that our panellists have addressed, but I've certainly heard that there are some themes around solutions that can be driven from energy efficiency, and whether that is the success of very well-designed and complementary legislation, as we've heard from the EC, whether that's around how effective communication strategies can be when they really target audiences well, in the case of the 19 degrees in France, or certainly even the need to understand and identify innovative financing solutions and have financing build upon itself to really unlock the potential for energy efficiency. I think we've heard some really excellent examples of the ways that governments have implemented energy efficiency measures and the ways that they are looking to accelerate them. So the next session that we have is actually a moderated discussion where our panellists now have an opportunity to ask each other some burning questions that they may have had from listening to each other. I do warn you, if you don't have any to hand, I will kick you off and start some myself. But I'd like to open the floor and see if anyone would like to start with a question. And I would note that Ben's holding the microphone. I'm happy to start off. I will start with one to Tudor in the role of the European Commission. Can you explain to us a little more about some of the key barriers that the European Commission has experienced while accelerating the promotion of energy efficiency, particularly during the most recent energy crisis? What are some of those internal and external forces that you've either successfully overcome or you've had to identify ways around as a result of that time?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, the crisis came with a lot of challenges and, of course, to need to react quickly. But it was also a period when, you have to understand, a lot of the legislation in this field was already in the process of being made. It was in the process of being made with the objectives we have established for 2030. But then we had to adapt. The challenge is how to adapt something which was already in the process of being made and to become suddenly more ambitious. And then to go back to the member states, to the council, to parliaments, to work together and to open a dialogue for more ambitious targets, for example. Now we have a deal under the trilogues for the ED, but also for the EPBD, what new measures to come in place to not only keep the ambition, but even to be more ambitious. So this, but I have to say it was an engagement from all member states and from stakeholders. So it was understood. It was a process. It is still a process of negotiations till the end of the year. But for the EPBD at least, we hope to bring this to a good end, and not only, also the renewables. And maybe here, not just on the part of negotiations, but what is important and what we have seen as a challenge now is a part of course, implementation. Because we have ambitious targets, we have ambitious objectives, but we need to put them into practice, and we have secured a lot of funding, but still there are issues and to be addressed. There are, for example, issues addressed to the availability of the labor force and the skills necessary, both for energy efficiency and for renewables. Then is the issue of compliance and verification. For example, the labeling and the eco-design bring a lot of benefits, we know, for energy efficiency, but we calculated that non-compliance makes actually that these benefits are reduced by at least 10%. So we need stronger monitoring and verification and compliance system in place to help this happening. Then we have to see also how to combine, and what we have seen now in this crisis, and it was an interesting analysis made by the IA a couple of days ago, showing that basically through accelerating permitting for renewables, just through the newly added renewables we have added in this period over these 2 years, we managed to somehow reduce the wholesale energy prices by 8%. So renewables help actually also affordability, helps energy efficiency, as on the other hand, energy efficiency helps us at least in achieving the targets we have for renewables, which are defined sometimes as also share of the total final energy. So in this context, to put things to work together, the challenge becomes very much what we, and I have to go back to one, it was in a way one of the first communication in supporting the Green Deal, energy system integration, and where to look at the various value chains, but also to look at the various energy carriers to see what solution would make most sense and make energy efficiency and renewables work really together to the benefit of the overall system efficiency of our energy economy. And this is something which I think we'll have to continue work on, because there is not yet a prescribed receipt for this, but we see the benefits of having this more broader engagement on both fronts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think you've touched on what is one of the enduring challenges of energy efficiency, which is positioning it within the broader context of the energy world, where it takes its place alongside renewables and other measures which all need to come together and fit together to actually be able to unlock that greater potential. Sorry, Ben, did you have a question? Or?
I can ask one, sure. But can I ask a question to anyone that chooses to pick it up? Okay. Yeah, curious to know, like, obviously we're in an environment right now, and maybe I'm going to speak from the Canadian context a little bit, but curious to get a sense from any of the panelists to what this means in their own domestic context. But, given kind of our current, global financial environment right now. Rising interest rates, more challenging fiscal situations, probably generally, overall globally. Maybe challenging political contexts as well too, in terms of, new regulations. What are other countries looking towards, and other regions looking towards, in terms of the more effective opportunities to really address energy efficiency and really drive energy efficiency towards very ambitious climate goals? So curious about some of those strategies beyond kind of big incentive programs, big regulation. What have been sort of the more effective tools?
Do I have any takers on the panel? Paul?
I can start. Well, of course, difficult question from my point of view, because I didn't talk about a little bit about financing, because sufficiency, you could see it as okay, you reduce temperature, so it doesn't cost anything. It reduces both the demand, and also, I didn't talk about it, but one of the effect was to reduce the spot price of electricity, because some experts thought that we could not fit the bill in winter, and in fact, we managed without any emergency signal on the fact. In your question, it's working in progress. So maybe I don't have the liberty, and also all the feedbacks and the decision. There will be a political debate in autumn, by the way, in France about. I want to mention this because, of course, sometimes in the transition you have investment going in, and of course for energy efficiency there would be piece of equipment and things like that. Sufficiency can be in the first step. Could be also demanding for investment, because when you want to reduce a little bit something, you need equipment to do that efficiently, or otherwise it's not working, and it's disappointing. But in terms for more the long term and investment, we start to touch upon discussion about what we do in the future. Especially, I'm thinking for a question about leisure. We don't know about ski resort and things like that, and we will have to replace something, and that need major investment, major discussion among the things. So probably there will be discussion in the future about also to redirect some part of the investment, and that won't be minimal. That could be massive, because redirection means we start to use, of course, the current infrastructure. But for instance, let's say this is not sufficiency, but the electric vehicle, of course, is massive. It's massive investment. And the sufficiency part is how you're going to use this new massive infrastructure where you are putting a lot of money. At least in France, this is I'm not in the liberty, and maybe I don't have the helicopter view of the thing, but with a new way of spending your time, you have to think in advance about it, and that's really. We start to have this discussion, and probably at the higher level we will have a discussion around this, about national infrastructure of transportation and everything.
Thank you. Tudor, was there anything you wanted to contribute to that, or no? And Claire, yeah.
So I in response to Ben's questions, I essentially have the same questions. So in the Australian context, we are working hard to try and use all of the regulatory and funding and low-cost finance loans mechanisms that we can to affect the same kind of transition. And I think, from our point of view, the successive ramping up of stringency and ambition around things like building codes has been really effective. and it's made a huge difference. But in the context of our own federation, there's very different levels of engagement with that by different state and territory governments, and that's got significant challenges around it. I guess one of the other things that we're trying to focus on are the questions that have been raised around workforce and skills, and how you build the supply chains to do energy efficiency well and at scale. But I certainly don't have any answers for that. One of the things that's worked well in one of our territory governments is that instead of providing grants or low-cost finance direct to households, they've done it through companies that can validate and verify the work that's being done. So, in the Canadian case where you need to get an energy audit before you can access finance, in this particular case, you need to do that, but then also the money doesn't go to the householder, it goes to the installer of the insulation or the installer of the double glazing or the installer of the solar panels, and the regulation and quality assurance around that work is really high, and so the success of that scheme is really that they know they're getting what they pay for, and they know that the householder is going to get the full benefit of the upgrades that have been made. So in designing our own schemes at the Commonwealth level, we're trying to learn from some of the work that various of our jurisdictions have done. None of those things scale as well, but you get better bang for buck.
Thank you. Does anyone have another question that they would like to pose to another panel member?
I have another question. We had, during this sufficiency debate, we had also cross-sector questions, and by that, I think the most interesting one was the teleworking, and the effect on reducing the consumption and energy consumption for mobility and also in the building. So do you have discussion about it? Of course, it's not purely energy efficiency, each sector, but when you combine this, you start to have, let's say, an overall efficiency within the society.
Takers to that particular question around the benefits or the multiple benefits that might be found with energy efficiency and buildings and transportation and teleworking?
I'm happy to step in and take one. I don't think it's been as much of a conversation in Canada as maybe what it should be, I think. And, certainly the amount of unused office space and the energy impact, of that unused space has been noticed, and how do we look to, make our existing buildings, more energy efficient, but also looking at the overall use of those buildings and how do we adapt that. Certainly from the telework standpoint, that has been, obviously something that we have been undertaking in Canada, and certainly within the public context, and how we shift to a kind of a hybrid kind of work environment. But I don't feel we've looked enough at kind of what the potential energy impacts are. There's kind of this shift to what is the right kind of model, more from a worker standpoint, and what does that mean for our existing use of building stock. But there hasn't been, I don't think, enough of a focus on the energy efficiency aspects of it, at least in terms of the the dialogue and debate on the pros and cons of a hybrid working model.
Thank you. Does anyone have another question that they would like to pose, or I have one that I would like. I'm sorry, Tudor, I'm going to pick on you again. The question is really around, you've touched on regulation, and obviously the European Union has done a lot of work in terms of the negotiations with its member states on the Fit for 55 and the Green Deal before that, and now the Net Zero Industry Act, and it's been obviously quite successful as it's been progressing, but I would wonder, going forward, what would you see as some of the key challenges, other than implementation of the existing regulation, but what are some of those key challenges that those member states are going to face, and how would the European Union support member states in addressing the challenges of increased regulation at a time where individual consumers are really feeling the pinch?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, it is a challenge of implementation, but it is also the challenge that, and I have to say now, and that's why I didn't answer previous question, because it was difficult to answer for 27 member states. Now, we try to develop a framework for 27 member states, and then the point is that with the energy transition, with the changing of the energy system, you see more and more the share of distributed generation, for example, is increasing everywhere. And you'll have to coexist, yeah, centralized and distributed generation. But then this means that a lot of also decisions and investments may be done at regional, but also at local level. And the governance of all this and of a new energy system, which relies more on distributed solutions, which brings in new technologies. We are going to have more renewables. Understood also yesterday I had the opportunity to hear how ambitious Australia is also on renewables, but we are very ambitious on renewables, and we aim to, in the end, we'll have by 2030, over 70% in the electricity, in the power generation renewables. So, but this has to be properly integrated. We'll need more storage. We need short-term storage. We need also large-scale energy storage if we want this to happen. And again, how do we do this also with the local communities, with the member states, but also with the regions and with cities, but also with the rural areas, which have other maybe challenges but also some opportunities. So this is something which we need to definitely dedicate more. We try to offer as much as possible also with all the funding instruments I have mentioned, and which are in the range of tens of billions, significant. Also technical assistance, and encourage also member states to offer this technical assistance. At a certain moment, try to centralize this and benefit of the capabilities also of the European Investment Bank in this respect, in order to ensure that there is a common approach and guidance as much as possible whenever this can be designed and taken into account, because we also aim at the end of the day to keep and to maintain and to strengthen the internal market for energy, which is very important. We have seen how important it was now in order to be resilient and to be able to face also an external energy crisis. Yeah, this is what I would first say.
Thank you. Ben, I have a question for you. You've obviously spoken quite a bit about the building stock and the challenges you have with housing, and I know we were talking earlier, and Australia faces many of the similar challenges as I would suspect many of the member countries, both in the hub and broader. But Canada and Australia also share some similarities in terms of just the sheer space and the scale and the geography of our countries. And in terms of those harder to abate sectors that are more challenging, transport is obviously looming large in that space. And I'm just wondering, is there anything you can share about what Canada is doing in terms of its transport sector and energy efficiency, and what measures you might be looking at in the future, or particular areas that you know will be a concern of the things that the governments will need to address as time goes on?
Yeah, sure. And so, obviously, from the transportation sector, that another major given as you pointed out, our geographic size in Canada is significant. So, transportation sector is right there with the built environment in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions that is being sort of driven by that sector. So we are looking at a number of different options in the transportation sector as well too, and certainly our drive towards electric vehicles and sort of the push in that sense is really significant. And looking at the technology side of things as well too is a big driver for us in the transportation space. And from our group, from our side of things, we are, to touch on your point as well about the geographic size of Canada, from the building side of things too, it is very different in the north of Canada as it is in the south of Canada. And we need to develop strategies in Canada that are not a one-size-fits-all approach in order for us to equitably sort of drive, our climate agenda, but also to do it in a way that, makes sense for all parts of the country, is really important. And we frequently use the expression of meeting Canadians where they're at, of meeting regions where they're at in terms of their ability to drive emissions reduction, and as we continue with these conversations, with folks across the country, governments across the country, governments in the north, governments in the south, we continue to better understand what some of the the challenges of what different policies and regulations that we could consider putting in place for areas what we call south of 60 in Canada, versus the north, and even if we're looking at exceptions to the way that we are rolling out policies, there are various effects that might be indirect that we aren't considering. You've talked about labor, and as we transition from a fossil fuel driven home heating and cooling in Canada to more electric, that also drives the labor force as well too, and a transition in the labor force and upskilling to better enable that transition to how we are, enabling households across Canada to make that choice, that they are to hopefully lower cost, heating and cooling, but also lower greenhouse gas emissions coming out of the home. But that does have impacts on our more remote communities across Canada as well too, and often they're indirect and ones that might not be considered up front as we initially look to roll out policies. And that is a real challenge, and a challenge for those communities that will continue to use fossil fuels to heat their homes. And if the labor force is sort of moving towards supporting kind of the electric transition in Canada, that will have potential impacts on those communities that will continue to use fossil fuels, that will need to until the infrastructure is in place to enable a transition that is lower emissions in some of those more remote communities.
Thank you. Sorry, yes, Judah?
If I take advantage to ask a question as well, because for my co-panelists, for both actually, because now this event is hosted and grateful again by the Energy Efficiency Hub, which brings 16 members, 16 countries and regions together, and the hub benefits, of course, for the fact that it's integrated into the IEA on all the analytical capability and so. But I would like, on the other hand, it offers this platform, which I found it important, and for us is important, and the hub can really play an important role, I think, at least for the intergovernmental dialogue on energy efficiency at the global level, and also in this discussion which is coming now about more ambitious objectives, even at the global level, as our president underlined. But what would you think if we speak about speaking about now, of course, this energy crisis, but it's also the climate crisis, which affects everyone, but also energy crisis affects more or less everyone in the world, and having these members being from Asia or from South America, where would you see the priorities maybe for cooperating with these other members, peers we have in the Energy Efficiency Hub?
Yeah, so I think I think there's one area that we've been thinking about quite a lot, and maybe this touches, Tudor, on your point that you had made in your response most recently, is around the potential benefits and impacts of digitalization, and I think there's some real opportunities, and this is I would still consider this relatively nascent thinking in Canada, and we are trying to bring together, as an example, the various parts of our natural resource department in Canada to really better understand kind of the potential impacts of smart technologies and digital tools that will really help to better as we continue to transition, how do we use digitalization to maximize the ability for households to use electricity, for example. And I think that is something where we do see a real potential for partnering within the Energy Efficiency Hub and the work of the digitalization working group. And I think that is policy work that we're really trying to drive domestically. And I think there's a lot to learn and benefit from other partner countries. So we're really excited about what the potential of some of this work could be.
Well, maybe not specifically an area, but I think that which in Europe at least we had a little bit thanks to this energy crisis. I'm a bit sad to say that, but we had a common message to in terms of energy efficiency. Like I just take something that pops up in my mind is that I went to the hotel in Brussels and there were some instruction from the hotel to save energy. So and digitalization would be, I think we're all going to this, but also if we have a common sense, because that would be human also to in front of the machine, just to correctly use this would be also very, very useful. So that's my part of the answer.
Thanks. And I guess picking up on some of Paul's comments earlier, one of the things that we in Australia have really struggled with is how to get the messaging to cut through about this. I think your points before about 19 degrees or about how you make the explanation about what individuals, households, businesses can do to increase their own energy efficiency, how to get that to cut through, how to make it easy and how to make it possible for people to make those decisions when they want to save their bills, when they want to do something for the planet, for the climate. I think that the Hub has an opportunity to exchange good practice, good experience, what works and what hasn't around public communication. I think that would be a huge breakthrough to learn more about that.
Thank you, and thank you, Tudor, it was a very timely question of reminding us that the Energy Efficiency Hub is a group of members, and each one of those members is at different positions and experiencing different challenges on their energy transition journeys. And of course, I think that the Secretariat would be quite happy for me to mention that one of the aims of the Energy Efficiency Hub is not to be limited to 16 members, because of course it's going to be by expanding that membership, by having a broader reach into regions across Latin America, across Africa, the Asia-Pacific region, that we are going to be able to take the lessons that the countries currently in the hub have already learned and experienced and actually be able to give those to others to make this global transition a lot faster and hopefully a lot less expensive for those countries that are going to be most affected by climate and most challenged by rising energy prices. I would say, just is there any other questions that anyone would like to ask now before we transition to the next section? Because we have put you on the spot with a few things, so I do thank you very much for your time on that. I would like to just again, personally thank each and every one of you for coming and sharing your views and experiences and on behalf of your country. It's been really important, I think, to be able to hear where things have gone well, because we can learn from them, but also those things which are going to be challenging and things around expanding regulations or financing or communicating strategies on getting everyone on board on this are things we all see in common. I'd like to hand back over now to Claire. To allow her to have a bit of a wrap-up and provide some closing comments for us.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks again to the IEA and the French government for hosting the conference, and to the Energy Efficiency Hub for bringing this event together. I think there have been a few really important common themes and common experiences that the panels talked through today. It is about our response and learnings from the crisis. It seems to me that none of us has wasted that crisis, that it's been, as Brian was discussing earlier, an opportunity to try and lock in increased interest and momentum around energy efficiency And it sounds to me like at least the jurisdictions that we have represented here have all taken significant steps to try and do that in sectors, right across the spectrum, from households and businesses, commercial buildings, but also pushing into transport and heavy industry. So I think there's, everybody knows there's a lot of work to do, but it is incredibly useful to hear about the kinds of different approaches that different countries are taking, the sorts of considerations around whether it's regulation, direct funding, low interest loans, and that kind of enlisting our citizens in making good decisions when they're thinking about how they use energy. Tudor's point about whether we can get to a better integrated thinking about the energy system, the role of energy efficiency in that system, at the same time as many of our countries are trying to essentially build a new energy system to integrate renewables, to take advantage of energy efficiency, but also to think about how we manage a very distributed set of energy generation. In Australia, I think, Chris will know the number, I don't know the number, more than 20% of the contribution to our national energy market comes from rooftop solar. And that's amazing and extraordinarily challenging as an energy security and an energy integration and an overall systems management piece. So we all have challenges. Some of them are very common, some of them are quite different, but it's really important to be hearing about what the different success stories are, the level of reduction of energy consumption in France under its plan, and where the emissions reduction targets are going in Canada and the very ambitious EU-wide programs. There's a lot of, I want to say there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of hope and a lot of activity, and it seems to me that there is a silver lining that people have really taken advantage of through the crisis. So I just wanted to add my thanks to my fellow panellists, and I think with that, probably hand back to Chris to wrap us up.
Thank you very much. So obviously, we're coming to the close. We're a little bit ahead of time, so we've done quite well in that respect. I'd just like to point out that being here today and over the next few days at this conference is a very unique opportunity where we are all being brought together to talk about these issues around energy efficiency. The fact that this is the 8th Global Energy Efficiency Conference, it's not my first, I've been to some before, it does speak to the fact that this is it is and it continues to be one of the key ways that governments, that companies, that finance, investment industry will look to address energy affordability, security, and of course our climate crisis and the transition to net zero economies. So I just welcome anyone who is here today or who has been watching online. If you do have questions, if you'd like to know more about some of these practical applications, of course these are all members of the Energy Efficiency Hub. I am sure that the Hub would be keen to share the experiences, to focus on some of the other countries and what they have been doing. Obviously there are some very big pieces of work that Japan, the United States, China are currently working on, that they'd be more than happy to direct you to the Hub resources to see those and to get in touch with the Secretariat. But I would like to take the opportunity now to close the live stream, to thank everyone in the room and to just remind everybody that we do still have time if you would like to get lunch.